In front of his brightest engineers, the Millionaire CEO decided to humiliate the cleaning lady. Pointing to an impossible equation on the board, he mocked, "If you solve this, I'll marry you." The whole room laughed. His smile vanished when she calmly picked up the marker and, in 10 seconds, wrote the answer. A shocked silence took over everyone. Before the CEO could speak, the CFO stood up, pale, and said, "Congratulations, ma'am. You were..." And the revelation he made next showed that she was not a cleaning lady, but the only person they all should fear. The quantum tech war room, high above the pulsating financial district of San Francisco, was a sanctuary of glass and steel, built on pillars of astronomical ambition and colossal figures. On this late afternoon, however, the air was not thick with success, but with suffocating, imminent failure. The silence was dense, cut only by the low hum of the servers and the discreet tick-tock of a Swiss timepiece on the wrist of Ryan Anderson. The multi-millionaire CEO who had built this empire from nothing. He glared furiously at the immense glass whiteboard dominating the main wall, a shimmering monster covered in a complex equation, a mathematical maze that represented a dead end in their new revolutionary encryption algorithm. His top engineers, all brilliant minds recruited for a king's ransom from MIT and Stanford, remained silent, defeated. Their slumped shoulders and vacant stares betrayed hours of futile effort, billions of dollars in investment, and the company's reputation, a fortune built with sweat and a dose of pure genius, depended on this elusive solution. Every second of impasse meant a loss of capital he could barely calculate. Into that nearly palpable tension, the door slid open without a sound, and Ava, the floor's cleaning woman, slipped silently in with her utility cart. Her movements were discreet, almost invisible, a rehearsed choreography designed not to disturb the routine of the geniuses who worked there. Tired, humiliated by the stubborn numbers, and desperately needing a target for his mounting frustration, Ryan watched her stop for an instant, her gaze fixed on the whiteboard. Her deep, serene brown eyes seemed to track the lines of code with an unusual curiosity, a spark of interest that the CEO, in his arrogance, interpreted as sheer ignorance. A cruel, sharp smile crossed his face. It was the perfect distraction. "Like the artwork, sweetie?" he asked loudly, the sarcasm dripping from every syllable, ensuring the whole room heard him. The engineers, caught off guard, chuckled nervously, a discomforting sound that echoed in the oppressive silence. They needed to appease the boss, even if the joke was in terrible taste. Ava did not move. She just continued to stare at the board. "Do you know what this is?" Ryan continued, feeling the power surge back into his veins with that small dose of cruelty. "This is what separates geniuses from people like you. But you know what? I'm feeling generous today." He stretched out his arm, the gold ring on his finger glinting under the cold light, and pointed to the insoluble equation. "Solve that, and I'll marry you." Ha 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 ha. The room exploded in louder, more confident mockery this time. The humiliation of an anonymous employee seemed to relieve their own incompetence. Ava, however, did not react to the offense. Her expression remained impenetrable. Slowly, she dropped the trash bag she was holding, the plastic making a soft noise on the polished floor. With firm, determined steps, she walked toward the conference table, ignoring the stunned looks, and picked up the red marker resting beside a state-of-the-art laptop. "Ubu, what are you?" Ryan began to say, his mocking smile frozen on his face, confusion beginning to bloom in his eyes. The woman was neither crying nor running away. She was acting, and no one in that room, least of all him, could predict what would happen next. In less than 10 seconds, the reality of that room was shattered and reassembled in a way no one could have predicted. Ava walked to the board, and with a fluidity that bordered on dance, she crossed out 3 entire lines of Ryan's equation, the red strokes appearing like open wounds on weeks of work. Beneath the stricken chaos, She wrote a single line of mathematical code, an expression of pure and undeniable elegance. The sound of the marker being tossed back onto the table was like a gunshot in the ensuing silence. She then bent down, retrieved her trash bag with the same calm of someone cleaning an empty office in the middle of the night, and turned to Levy as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The silence in the room was absolute, a pressure in their ears, deafening in its intensity. Everyone present, from the newest intern to the senior engineer, was petrified, eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and shock. What had just happened defied all logic, all the hierarchy upon which that corporate world was built. The cleaning woman, the lowest rung on that pyramid of egos and salaries, had dared to touch the sacred altar of their genius. The chief engineer, a pale, thick-spectacled man named Rick, was the first to move. It was a spasmodic motion, like an automaton receiving a command. He raced to the board, his face inches from the new annotations, and pulled out his tablet, his fingers trembling as he furiously typed, checking the numbers, running simulations. Sweat broke out on his forehead. He looked at the old equation, at Ava's correction, and back at the results on his screen. His lips moved soundlessly for an instant before he managed to stammer, his voice faint and full of reverence. My God, she simplified the matrix. She used a unified field theorem that isn't even taught here. This is correct. This solves everything. Ryan felt the floor disappear beneath him. He was white, breathless. His brain, the high-performance machine that built a fortune from ideas, seemed to have short-circuited. He looked from the serene figure of the cleaning woman, who now waited patiently near the door, to the impossible solution on the board. Humiliation was an icy wave that drained the blood from his face, leaving behind a mask of panic. He had publicly ridiculed the person who, in seconds, solved a problem his highly paid geniuses couldn't crack in months. Before he could formulate a single word, a sound broke the spell. Stuart, the CFO, the oldest and most discreet man in the room, slowly rose and began to clap. The sound was slow, deliberate, each clap echoing like a hammer blow to Ryan's arrogance. Stuart did not look at the CEO. His eyes, small and incredibly astute, were fixed on Ava. "Congratulations, Doctor," he said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable weight. A smile of genuine relief and respect spread across his face. "You have been approved." The word doctor hung in the air, loaded with confusion. Ryan, terrified and completely lost, could only whisper, his voice a thread, "Doctor." It was then that Stuart finally turned and locked eyes with his CEO. The contempt in his gaze was as sharp as a shard of glass. "Ryan, I want you to meet Dr. Ava Bennett, the theoretical physicist the Zurich Council hired to conduct the final audit of your leadership and this entire project. She insisted on coming undercover for a week to see who you truly were when nobody important was watching. And now, we've all seen." Stuart's words fell into the room like stones into a still pond, and the ripples of shock hit each person differently. For the engineers, the revelation transformed embarrassment into cold dread. They had laughed, they had mocked, they had been complicit in the public humiliation of one of contemporary theoretical physics' most important minds, an auditor sent by the Zurich Council, the near-mythical entity controlling the destiny and fortune of everyone there. Their faces, previously pale, now acquired shades of green. Cold sweat trickled down their necks. They exchanged furtive glances, a silent communication of panic and guilt, trying to mentally distance themselves from the figure of Ryan, who now seemed toxic, radioactive. The leader they feared and admired had become, in the blink of an eye, a pariah. Loyalty, once a pillar of their careers, was now a dangerous liability. For Ryan, reality disintegrated in slow motion. The surrounding sound seemed distant, muffled, as if he were submerged in icy water. Dr. Ava Bennett. The name echoed in his mind, each syllable a hammer blow to his colossal ego. He looked at the woman who, minutes earlier, was just part of the furniture, an invisible being whose existence he only noticed to despise. Now he saw the upright posture, the unshakable calm in her brown eyes, the sharp intelligence that he, in his blind arrogance, had failed to see. There was no triumph on her face, not an ounce of satisfaction. There was only professional, almost clinical serenity, which made everything worse. It was the look of a scientist observing a specimen, of a judge evaluating a defendant. All his wealth, the billions in assets, the deals closed with a firm handshake, the image of an indomitable genius he cultivated so meticulously. Everything seemed like a cheap farce under that gaze. Ava, in turn, felt the weight of the situation. Her disguise was a tool, a method to obtain raw, unfiltered data about the company's culture and the true nature of its leadership. She did not expect such a public confrontation. An explosion of such pure arrogance. In her week there, she saw more than enough. Talented engineers intimidated, promising ideas scornfully dismissed, and an environment where fear trumped innovation. Ryan was not just a failed leader, he was a bottleneck, an obstacle to the very progress he flaunted. Her report to the council was already mentally written, and the scene this afternoon was merely the devastating conclusion. She looked at the frightened faces of the young engineers and felt a pang of compassion. They were victims of this system as much as she had been the target of mockery. Stewart, the veteran CFO, the only one there who understood the true dimension of what was at stake, took the reins of the situation. His calm was that of a man accustomed to managing crises that could decimate stock market value. "Rick," he said, his firm voice addressing the chief engineer, "take your team. Your workday is over. I ask for total discretion about what happened here. The future of the company depends on it." Rick, still trembling, merely nodded, gathering his engineers like a hurried shepherd. They left in silence, without daring to look back, leaving Ryan alone with his two judges. When the door closed, isolating the three in the war room that now resembled a tribunal, Ryan finally found a thread of his former voice. This is absurd," he stammered, trying to inject authority into his trembling voice. "A setup. Stewart, you can't allow this." Stewart ignored him completely. He turned to Ava with a respect Ryan had never received from him. "Dr. Bennett, please forgive the deplorable spectacle. I believe your initial analysis is complete." Ava nodded, her gaze still fixed on Ryan, who stared at her with a mix of hatred and dread. "Yes, Stewart. The behavioral analysis is complete," she said, her voice clear and precise. "Now we can proceed to the financial and management audit. I have some questions about an investment fund in the Cayman Islands and the sudden shift in profitability of certain assets." The mention of the Cayman Islands fund was the trigger that transformed Ryan's shock into pure, cold fury. If public humiliation had disarmed him, the invasion of his private affairs rearmed him with the rage of a cornered animal. That account was his financial sanctuary, a bold side project he believed was the key to doubling his already vast personal fortune. A secret investment not listed in any official quantum tech balance sheet. It was the vault of his most megalomaniacal dreams, where he moved capital with a predator's agility, far from the curious eyes of the board and petty shareholders. The idea that this woman, the cleaning lady, even knew of its existence was an inconceivable violation. His fists clenched on the mahogany table, his knuckles white. "You have no right," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous, abandoning any pretense of civility. "This is a private matter. It has nothing to do with the company. You are overstepping all bounds." Ava did not back down. Her brown eyes remained fixed on his, calm and analytical. On the contrary, Ryan, the council believes it has everything to do with the company, especially when the profitability reports of that fund appear inversely proportional to the cash flow of R&D projects that were mysteriously cancelled last year, projects that promised high dividends for our shareholders. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. I'd like to understand the logic behind those investment decisions. Apparently, Quantum Tech's assets were used to leverage assets that don't appear in our books. Every word was a veiled, precise, and surgical accusation. She wasn't speculating, she was stating facts. Ryan's blood ran cold. She knew. Somehow, she knew the details, the maneuvers he considered his masterpiece of financial engineering. This is absurd, a slander, he roared, rising from his chair, trying to use his height and physical presence to intimidate her. Stuart, are you just going to stand there and let this imposter destroy everything we built, our wealth, the future of the company? Stuart sighed, a tired sound from someone who anticipated this explosion. He adjusted in his chair, his gaze severe. Ryan, calm down. Dr. Bennett is not an imposter. She has the express authorization of the Zurich Council. I've seen the documentation. They are concerned, and rightly so. Our stock market value depends on our integrity. If there is a perception of poor management, our net worth could evaporate in hours. He looked at Ava. Doctor, please continue. Ryan felt betrayed, abandoned. Stuart, his mentor, the man who helped him turn a small business into a billion-dollar empire, was now on her side. The floor had vanished completely. He was in free fall. Ava, realizing that the direct approach was only creating more resistance, changed tactics. Her expression softened slightly, though her eyes lost none of their intensity. Ryan, I'm not here to destroy the company, quite the opposite. I'm here to ensure it survives and prospers. For that, I need to understand the whole, the full picture. She opened a leather folder that was on her cart, next to the cleaning supplies, and took out a single document. It wasn't a financial report or a bank statement. It was an old, faded photograph of an older man, smiling, next to a much younger Ryan. Before we talk about cryptocurrencies and offshore funds, Ava said, her voice soft, I'd like to talk about this man, your father, and about the promise you made to him when he gave you the inheritance that became Quantum Tech's initial capital. The photograph, placed on the cold mahogany surface of the conference table, was a temporal anomaly, a ghost of a simpler, perhaps more honest past. The time-faded image captured a moment Ryan had strived to bury under layers of success and cynicism. In it, a middle-aged man with worker's hands and a gentle smile. His father, Albert, put a proud arm over the shoulders of a teenage Ryan, skinny and bright-eyed, holding his first science fair diploma. That image was the embodiment of the promise, the ground zero from which all his immense fortune had sprouted. The blow was deeper than any accusation about funds and assets. Ava hadn't attacked his empire. She had targeted its foundation, its soul. For an instant, the billionaire CEO disappeared, and in his place was only Albert's son, the boy who dreamed of changing the world with technology, not just accumulating wealth. The memory hit him like a wave, vivid and overwhelming. He was back in the small workshop behind the family home, the smell of wood and machine oil filling the air. His father wasn't a businessman, but an inventor, a craftsman who believed that the value of a creation lay in its utility and beauty, not its price. That day, shortly before passing away, Albert had called him for a talk. Ryan, he had said, his voice already weakened by illness. All I have, this whole inheritance, it's not much money, but it's enough. It's your seed capital. I want you to promise one thing. He held his son's hand, the grip surprisingly firm. Promise me you'll build something that lasts, something that helps people. Don't just chase the easy profit, the compound interest that feeds greed. Create real value. Use this wealth to build a legacy, not just a financial empire. Ryan had promised, tears in his eyes, and in the beginning, he tried. Quantum tech was born from that promise, from a genuine desire to innovate. But the business world was voracious. The pressure from investors, the siren call of the stock market, the adrenaline of turning hundreds into millions and millions into billions. The promise became a whisper, then an echo, until it was completely lost in the deafening noise of his own success. He convinced himself that his father was naive, a dreamer who didn't understand how the world really worked. The true power was in cash flow, in application profitability, in deals closed in glass rooms like this one. Back in the present, Ryan's throat was dry. He looked at Ava, and for the first time, hatred was replaced by a cruel spark of fear. That woman didn't just have information. She had understanding. She had dug deep into his life, beyond the balance sheets and cryptocurrencies, and found his greatest vulnerability, the memory of who he used to be. "How dare you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with repressed emotion. "You know nothing about my father." "About me. I know he left a modest inheritance that you transformed into a billion-dollar empire," Ava replied, her voice still soft but incisive. "And I know the promise you made him didn't involve canceling assistive technology projects for the elderly to divert funds into high-risk or purely personal return applications." The accusation was so specific, so precise, that it sucked the air from Ryan's lungs. It was the naked truth, the original sin of his new business philosophy. Shame burned on his face, but quickly metamorphosed into a defensive fury. She was stripping him bare, piece by piece, in front of Stuart, his lifelong ally. The humiliation was unbearable. He needed to regain control, reaffirm his power at any cost. If he couldn't defeat her with logic or intimidation, he would use the only weapon he had left, his absolute authority. He turned abruptly, his face a mask of rage, and pointed a trembling finger at the only other man in the room. "Stuart, you brought this viper into my company. You conspired behind my back. You are out," he declared, his voice suddenly loud and resonant. "You are fired. Clean out your desk, now." The firing order, shouted with the force of a deposed emperor, hung in the charged air of the room. For a moment, the only sound was Ryan's heavy breathing as he expected to see Stuart shrink, stand up, and leave defeated. He needed that victory, however small, to reassert that this was still his kingdom, that his power over people's destinies was still absolute. But the reaction he expected didn't come. Stuart didn't move. He remained seated, his body slightly leaning forward, and what Ryan saw in his eyes was not fear, but a deep, overwhelming sadness. It was the look of a disappointed father, of a mentor watching his brightest pupil get lost in a labyrinth of greed and ego. Stuart's silence was more eloquent than any argument, a silent condemnation that emptied Ryan's fury, leaving a cold vacuum in its place. He had fired his most powerful bullet, and it dissolved in the air before hitting the target. It was Ava who broke the impasse, her calm voice cutting the tension like a scalpel. "Ryan, your position as CEO grants you great authority," she began, choosing her words with careful precision, as if explaining a complex theory to a child. "But that authority is not unlimited. You do not have the power to fire a chief financial officer who reports directly to the board of directors without a formal vote, especially not during an official audit sanctioned by that same board." She paused, her eyes meeting his. Any attempt to do so would be viewed as obstruction and would only aggravate your situation. The cold, procedural logic of those words was irrefutable. The corporate structure Ryan had used to build his fortune now became his cage. He was the face of the company, the name at the top of the letterhead, but the true power, the political capital that moved the gears, was not in his hands. It belonged to a group of anonymous faces in Zurich, and Ava was their representative. The perception of his own impotence suffocated him. All his wealth, the assets he controlled, now seemed like an illusion, a house of cards about to collapse. This audit goes far beyond spreadsheets and cash flow, Ava continued, taking another document from her folder. It also assesses human capital and company morale. She slid the paper across the table. It was the original proposal for the assistive technology project, with the name of a young engineer, Lauren Miller, on the cover. I talked to Dr. Miller. I talked to her team. Brilliant, dedicated people who believed they were working on something aligned with this company's original values. The abrupt cancellation of the project, without plausible justification, destroyed the trust of some of your most promising talents. How do you explain to the board the decision to cut funding for a project with the potential to generate stable revenue and immense social good, to redirect the money into high-volatility cryptocurrency applications? Ryan had no answer. He looked at Lauren Miller's name and vaguely remembered an eager young woman trying to explain how her software could help seniors live independently. He had dismissed her with a wave of his hand. As he lost himself in his failure, Stuart's voice finally sounded, low and weighted with what seemed like years of silence. "He won't explain, Dr. Bennett, because he can't." Ryan raised his head, his eyes flashing. "Shut up, Stuart. Don't you dare." But Stuart interrupted him, not with anger, but with resigned firmness. He looked directly at the man to whom he had dedicated 30 years of his life, the boy he saw become a billionaire. "The Zurich Council didn't contact me, Ryan," he said, each word falling like a stone. "I contacted them 6 months ago. I requested the audit." Stuart's confession was the final shockwave, the one that broke Ryan's last defenses and left him completely exposed. If the revelation of Ava's identity was an earthquake, this was the ground opening up to swallow him. The man he considered his right hand, his most loyal advisor, the guardian of his darkest secrets, and in many ways a father figure after Albert's death, was the architect of his downfall. The betrayal was so deep, so fundamental, that it transcended business logic. It was personal. It was the denial of a lifetime of trust. Ryan stumbled backward, his hand seeking the support of the chair as if his legs had suddenly refused to hold him. He looked at Stuart's aging face, searching for a sign of a lie, a spark of deceit, but found only the solemn expression of a man who had carried a heavy burden for too long and had finally set it down. The air in the room seemed to thin, and Ryan's mind, usually a whirlwind of calculations and strategies, went into a white, terrifying silence. "You?" was the only word he managed to utter, his voice a hoarse whisper broken by incredulity. "Why?" Stuart sighed, a sound that carried the weight of months of anguish and difficult decisions. His eyes showed no malice, only infinite sadness. "Because I watched you change, Ryan. I saw the boy who wanted to build the future become a man obsessed only with accumulating personal wealth. You stopped talking about legacy and only talked about profit. You stopped valuing innovation and started valuing speculation. I watched the promise you made to your father be broken, piece by piece." He gestured toward Ava's folder. Lauren's project was the final straw. It was brilliant. It was humane. It was the kind of thing quantum tech was founded to do, and you discarded it like trash to fund your games on the stock market, risking company assets in pursuit of a few more zeros in your personal account. I couldn't stay silent anymore and watch the ship sink while the captain drilled holes in the hull, looking for treasure. The revelation changed the room's dynamic once more. Ava, who until then conducted the interrogation with a surgeon's precision, now became an observer of a much deeper drama. She understood that she wasn't just auditing a company's finances. She was witnessing the collapse of a fundamental relationship, the severance of a bond that was the true foundation of quantum tech. Her investigation, which she believed had been initiated by a distant, anonymous council in Zurich, had, in fact, been born from the heart of the company itself, from an act of desperation and loyalty to a lost ideal. This made everything more complicated and, at the same time, more real. Ryan, hearing Stuart's words, felt a wave of fury reanimate him. It was easier to feel anger than the searing pain of betrayal. Loyalty. You talk about loyalty after stabbing me in the back. He spat the words. I built this. Every dime, every dollar, every Bitcoin. This company is mine. I made you a rich man, Stuart. I gave you a life you never would have dreamed of. You gave me a salary, Ryan. Albert gave me a mission, Stuart replied, his voice firm, unshakable. And my loyalty is to the mission, not to your bank balance. He turned to Ava, his face a mask of determination. Dr. Bennett, I know your investigation is already complete, but the situation is more serious than the council imagines. I didn't just contact them with suspicions. He opened his own briefcase, which had been discreetly at his side the entire time, and pulled out a thumb drive. I have proof, copies of all the transactions, the emails, the orders to whitewash the liability reports. I have the full trail of how company capital was diverted into his personal funds. The thumb drive, small and black, rested in Stuart's outstretched hand like a ticking time bomb. For Ryan, that tiny object of plastic and metal contained the power to vaporize the universe he had built. Every deal closed, every bold investment, every brilliant maneuver to increase his fortune would all be reduced to ashes, transformed into proof of a crime. For a long, terrifying second, he couldn't breathe. The hum of the servers sounded like a swarm of locusts coming to devour his harvest. The paralysis broke into a wave of fury so intense he tasted bile in his mouth. You, he snarled, his voice distorted by rage. You ungrateful worm! I plucked you from obscurity, Stuart. I made you somebody. I put millions in your pocket, gave you access to a world you could only dream of, and this is how you repay me. Poking through my files like a rat in the dark. He stepped forward, his body tense like a spring about to jump. All these years, every advice, every warning, was it all a farce? Were you just gathering ammunition for the day you could destroy me and take what's mine? Stuart did not back down. The sadness in his eyes deepened, but his hand remained steady. There was no farce, Ryan. There was hope. The hope that the man I knew was still in there, beneath all the layers of arrogance and greed. I warned you about the digital gold investment last year. I showed you the projections, the risk to our working capital. I said it was reckless, that it jeopardized the jobs of hundreds of people. And what did you do? He paused, the memory clearly painful. You laughed in my face, said I was a dinosaur, that I didn't understand the new economy, said the future belonged to those who risked, not those who hid behind liability spreadsheets. I wasn't gathering ammunition, Ryan. I was desperately trying to keep you from shooting yourself in the foot. The exchange of accusations was a dead end, a cycle of pain and resentment. Ava realized she needed to intervene before the situation deteriorated further. With a calm movement, she subtly placed herself between the two men. She reached out and placed her hand gently over Stuart's, a gesture that was both thanks and command. Thank you, Stuart. I'll take it from here. Stuart looked at her, and the tension in his shoulders seemed to diminish. He nodded and, with a sigh, placed the thumb drive in her palm. Ava held it for a moment, the symbolic weight much greater than the physical, and then slipped it into the inside pocket of her blazer, a definitive gesture that transferred the power of that room to her. She turned to Ryan, whose face was a mask of impotent hatred. Ryan, I want you to understand the seriousness of what is happening. This has ceased to be an internal audit. With the evidence Stuart provided, the Council will be obliged to contact regulatory authorities. This is no longer about losing your CEO position. It's about the possibility of a freeze on all your assets, personal and corporate, while the investigation proceeds. Your fortune, your net worth, everything could be paralyzed. Ryan let out a short, bitter laugh, devoid of any humor. You have nothing without that, he said, pointing to the pocket where she had stored the thumb drive. Without this old man's betrayal, you'd only have suspicions. Ava shook her head slowly, her gaze never leaving his. There was an unexpected compassion in her eyes, which disarmed him more than any threat. Actually, Ryan, we already had almost everything. Stuart's thumb drive is confirmation, the final piece. We were alerted to your atypical financial movements 3 months ago. She paused, letting the next revelation drop with the weight of an anvil. The alert didn't come from within the company. It came from your ex-wife, Helen. Helen. The name hit him with the force of a phantom memory, an echo of a life he had chosen to leave behind. Helen, with her kind eyes, her passion for art, and her near-allergic aversion to the world of high finance he reveled in. Their divorce, years ago, had been amicable on the surface, but he always knew there was a deep, unhealing crack between their values. He saw her as idealistic and naive. She saw him as someone who had lost his way, seduced by the hollow brilliance of wealth. The separation had been a relief for him, freeing him to pursue his ambitions without the burden of her silent judgment. He had compensated her generously, ensuring she maintained a comfortable lifestyle, a gesture he considered not only fair, but a way to close that chapter of his life. The idea that she, of all people, could be the source of his ruin was so absurd, so out of the question, that for a moment he wondered if he wasn't in a feverish nightmare. "Helen," he repeated, his voice weak, the fury drained from his body and replaced by a cold confusion. "That's impossible. She doesn't understand anything about business. There's no way she could know." "She didn't need to understand business," Ava interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "She just needed to understand you. She contacted one of the council members, a friend of her family, not with accusations, but with concern. She said you were becoming reckless, obsessed. She mentioned conversations she overheard about high-risk applications, about using company assets as collateral to leverage your personal fortune. She feared you were jeopardizing not just yourself, but your father's legacy and the future of hundreds of employees." Ava's words painted a portrait Ryan didn't want to see. Helen hadn't reported him out of revenge or greed. She had done it out of concern. The concept was so foreign to him at that moment that his brain struggled to process it. He had built such high walls around himself, walls made of money, power, and success, that the idea of someone genuinely caring about his well-being felt like a foreign language. In his world, people approached him out of self-interest, for a slice of the pie, for a chance to profit from his ascent. The possibility of an altruistic act, especially coming from someone he had dismissed from his life, was destabilizing. Stuart, who had remained silent, cleared his throat. "She called me too, Ryan. After speaking with the council, she was crying. Said she didn't want to see you destroyed, but she was even more terrified of you destroying your father's memory. She begged me to do something, to try to bring you back to reason, before it was too late." The revelation was like a punch to the gut. The two people he respected most in his life, Stuart, his mentor, and Helen, his ex-wife, had conspired not to bring him down, but to save him from himself. The narrative he had constructed in his mind over the last few minutes of a great betrayal orchestrated by envy and greed crumbled completely, leaving behind only the uncomfortable truth of his own actions. He was not a victim. He was the cause. The silence in the room was heavy, filled only by the computer's hum and the sound of Ryan's breathing. He looked at the whiteboard, at the equation Ava had solved with humiliating ease. That seemed to have happened in another life. He looked at Ava's calm face, at Stuart's sad expression. They were not his enemies. They were the messengers of a truth he had refused to see. Slowly, like a man much older than his years, he sat down. The fight was over. The denial, the anger, the arrogance, everything drained away, leaving an immense void. For the first time in over a decade, Ryan had no plan, no strategy, no way out. He was completely and hopelessly lost. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely audible, not to Ava or Stuart, but to the emptiness that had settled within him. Ryan's question, stripped of all his habitual arrogance, hung in the air like a fragile prayer. It was not the question of a CEO demanding a plan of action, but the whisper of a man who finally understood the magnitude of his isolation. He looked at his hands on the mahogany table, the same hands that had signed billion-dollar contracts and moved fortunes with a click, and they suddenly seemed strange, useless. The empire he saw as an extension of himself, his greatest achievement, was now the scene of his greatest defeat, a gilded cage he had built himself. The wealth that defined his identity was now the proof of his crimes. The realization was overwhelming, a weight that threatened to pulverize him. Ava and Stuart exchanged a quick look, a silent communication between two people who, coming from completely different worlds, now shared a common purpose. It was Stuart who answered first, his voice low and tinged with the solemnity of someone delivering an inevitable verdict. "The council will be notified immediately," he said. "They will call an emergency meeting. You will be formally suspended from your duties as CEO, effective immediately. I will be appointed interim CEO to ensure stability and calm the markets. Our priority will be to communicate to the shareholders and the team that the company is in safe hands, that Quantum Tech's future does not depend on a single man." Every word was a nail in Ryan's coffin, closing the door on the life he knew, interim CEO. The phrase echoed in his mind. Stuart, his subordinate, would now be sitting in his chair. Ava continued, her tone more pragmatic, outlining the consequences that went beyond the company. "With the evidence in hand, the council will initiate legal proceedings to recover the diverted funds. Your personal assets, including the fund in the Cayman Islands and any cryptocurrency holdings, will be frozen by court order until the forensic audit is completed. You will need a good lawyer, Ryan, not a corporate lawyer, but a criminal defense attorney." The word criminal defense attorney was the most shocking of all. He had always seen himself as an aggressive player on the great board of business, someone who bent the rules but never broke them in a way that would attract the attention of the law. He saw himself as a financial genius, not a criminal. The idea of courts, formal charges, of a possible penalty that went beyond the loss of money and status, was an abyss he had never contemplated. Ryan did not respond. He just stayed there, sitting, his gaze lost in the distorted reflection of his face on the polished surface of the table. He thought of his father, of his promise. He had built a legacy, yes, but it was a legacy of numbers on a screen, a monument to his own vanity that was now about to be demolished. He thought of Helen, of her genuine concern, and felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in a long time, regret. A regret so deep and cutting that it was almost physical pain. It was then that Ava did something unexpected. She approached and sat down in the chair next to him. Not as an auditor, but as a human being. The gesture broke the formality of the room, creating a small space of quietness amidst the storm. "Ryan," she said, her voice soft, devoid of any judgment, "I am not your judge. My job was to assess the health of the company, and the health of a company is a direct reflection of the health of its leadership. What happens next, in the courts, in the media, will run its course. But what happens inside you, that is your choice." She opened her folder again and, this time, did not take out a financial document, but a simple business card. She placed it on the table in front of him. It was not a card for lawyers or financial consultants. It had only a name, Dr. Ethan Vance, and a phone number with the description, therapist. "Before I was a physicist, I studied the human mind, and I see a man who lost his way," she said. "Your father wanted you to build something of value. Perhaps the biggest investment you can make now isn't in stocks or bitcoins, but in finding out what that word, value, truly means to you, before you have nothing left to lose. The small white card on the table seemed like an insult, another blow to his already shattered dignity. Therapist. The suggestion was so absurd that, for a moment, Ryan's old arrogance threatened to resurface. He, Ryan Anderson, the titan of the financial district, needing a therapist. He solved problems with logic, capital, and willpower, not with conversations about feelings. He raised his eyes to Ava, ready to launch a cutting reply, to reject that offer of pity with the contempt it deserved. But then he saw her face. There was no pity there, no superiority. There was a serene clarity, an understanding that completely disarmed him. She didn't see him as a defeated CEO or a potential criminal. She saw him as he felt inside, a broken man, a rudderless ship drifting in an ocean of consequences. The anger died before it was born, replaced by an exhausting emptiness. Stuart, sensing the fragility of the moment, discreetly rose. I need to start making calls, he said, his voice a little hesitant. I need to talk to our legal team and prepare the press release. It's going to be a long night. It was an excuse, a way to give Ryan a moment of privacy, a final act of compassion for the man who had been his friend. He walked to the door and, before leaving, looked back one last time. Ryan, I'm sorry things came to this. Truly. The door closed softly, leaving an even deeper silence behind. Ryan and Ava were left alone in the war room, the epicenter of the earthquake that had shaken their lives. The sun was setting outside, painting the San Francisco sky in shades of orange and purple, the world's indifferent beauty, contrasting with the ugliness of the ruin that had settled inside. The city lights began to flicker, millions of lives continuing their course, oblivious to the collapse of a king in his glass tower. Why are you doing this? Ryan asked, his voice rough. Why give me that? He gestured toward the card. You got what you wanted. You destroyed me. You don't need to pretend you care. It's not pretense, Ava replied, her calm unshakable. My job here was objective. Identify a problem and present a solution for the good of the company. The problem was your leadership. The solution is your removal. That is business. She leaned forward slightly, and her eyes seemed to look beyond his facade. But I also saw what was on the board. The equation. There was brilliance there, Ryan. An extraordinary mind, even if it was headed in the wrong direction. And I saw the photo of your father. I saw the promise that once existed in your eyes. Destroying you was never the goal. The goal is to save the company. And perhaps, just perhaps, the man behind it can be saved too. Her words were devoid of sentimentality, but charged with an undeniable truth that struck him unexpectedly. She acknowledged his genius and his failure in the same breath. He looked at the card again. Dr. Ethan Vance. The name seemed strange, alien. He had spent his entire life building, accumulating, conquering. The idea of sitting in a room and deconstructing, slowing down, admitting weakness, it was terrifying. More frightening than facing a hostile counsel or a prosecutor. It was a journey inward, and he had no idea what he would find there. Fear, perhaps. Shame, certainly. And worst of all, the ghost of his father, waiting with a look of disappointment. Slowly, as if the small piece of paper weighed a ton, he reached out and picked up the card. His fingers trembled slightly. He held it, feeling the texture of the paper, the relief of the letters. It was a real object. A door to a path he never imagined traveling. It wasn't a solution to his legal or financial problems. It was something different. A chance. I don't know if I can, he whispered, more to himself than to her. No one ever knows when they start, Ava said, standing up. That's why it's called taking the first step. She picked up her purse and her coat, her movements efficient and silent, just as when she entered the room as the cleaning woman. Her mission there was complete. As she reached the door, she stopped and looked back at him one last time. "By the way, Ryan, the theorem I used to simplify your equation, it was developed by a theoretical physicist who abandoned a promising corporate career because he felt the relentless pursuit of profit was stifling the true beauty of discovery." She smiled, a small, enigmatic smile. His name was Albert Bennett. "My father." The revelation fell into the silent room with the weight of a cosmic truth, realigning all the pieces of Ryan's life puzzle in a way he never could have imagined. Dr. Ava Bennett, Albert Bennett. The connection was so obvious and, at the same time, so impossible that his mind refused to process it for an instant. He looked at her, standing by the door, and saw her in a completely new light. She was not just a brilliant auditor hired by a distant council. She was the heir to a legacy, the daughter of a man who, like his own father, believed in a purpose greater than money. The universe, in its cruel and poetic irony, had sent the daughter of the man who represented the antithesis of everything he had become to be the catalyst for his downfall. The symmetry was so perfect, so devastating, that it bordered on fiction. He hadn't just been surpassed in intelligence, but in moral inheritance. The theorem she used was not just a mathematical tool. It was a piece of her father's soul, a testament to his values, and she wielded it with the precision of a sword to cut the Gordian knot of his arrogance. Your father?" he stammered, his mind scrambling to connect the dots. He vaguely remembered reading the works of a certain Albert Bennett early in his career, a brilliant theorist whose ideas on quantum computing were considered visionary but unprofitable. A man who disappeared from the commercial circuit to dedicate himself to pure research. "He and your father would have gotten along well," Ava said, her voice soft but weighted with the gravity of an untold story. They both believed that true capital is not in the bank vaults, but in the human capacity to create, discover, and help. When the council contacted me, and I saw the company name and your name, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I felt I owed it to them, to both of them, to discover what had happened to the promise your father entrusted to you. She didn't need to say anything more. Ryan understood everything. The audit wasn't just a job for her, it was a personal mission, a way to honor her own father's memory by defending the values he shared with Albert, Ryan's father. The door closed, and Ava was gone, leaving Ryan in a silence deeper than any he had ever experienced. The war room, once the center of his power, was now a mausoleum for his ambitions. He was alone with the ghosts of two fathers and the crushing weight of his own failure. He looked at the photograph of his father, still on the table, and then at the therapist's card in his hand. Two paths. One had led him to ruin, the other was a complete unknown. For a long time, he didn't move. Pride, the habit of fighting, of never admitting defeat, was still strong within him. Calling a therapist was the final surrender. The admission that he couldn't fix this alone. But then he thought of Ava's expression, the sadness in Stuart's eyes, the concern in Helen's voice. No one was celebrating his downfall. They were mourning the loss of the man he could have been. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he picked up his state-of-the-art smartphone, the symbol of his technological success. His fingers, accustomed to dialing the numbers of brokers and international bankers, felt clumsy as they typed the sequence from the small white card. He raised the phone to his ear, his heart pounding against his ribs. He didn't know what to say, how to start, how to explain to a stranger the rise and fall of an empire built on a broken promise. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He was about to hang up, to succumb to fear and pride, when a calm, masculine voice answered on the other side. Dr. Ethan Vance's office. "Good evening." Ryan closed his eyes. The voice was gentle, professional. He took a deep breath, the air seeming to scrape his throat, and then he took the first step, the only word that mattered at that moment. the beginning of an uncertain journey back to himself. "Help," he whispered, his voice choked. I need help." 6 months passed. The financial district continued the same, a river of glass and steel flowing at the frenetic pace of business and capital. But for Ryan, it was like looking at a distant planet he once inhabited. The process was brutal. The suspension, the headlines, the investigation. He lost the CEO position, the board seat, the control of the company he founded. His vast wealth, a fortune that seemed infinite, was dissected by lawyers and auditors. Heavy fines and restitution agreements consumed most of his assets, from investment funds to his beloved cryptocurrencies. The billionaire empire crumbled, leaving behind a man with a fraction of his former wealth and the crushing weight of his choices. The punishment was severe but fair. Thanks to his total cooperation, motivated by a newfound desire to face the truth, he avoided the worst of the legal abyss. He was no longer a multimillionaire, but he also wasn't a prisoner. He was just Ryan. The sessions with Dr. Ethan Vance were his new battleground, a place much scarier than any meeting room. There were no profitability charts or market strategies to hide behind. There was only him and the echo of his decisions. He learned to strip away the armor of arrogance and face the vulnerable man underneath. A son terrified of failing his father's memory, who ended up failing in a much deeper way by chasing an empty metric of success. He understood that his obsession with accumulating money, dollars, euros, wasn't about wealth, but about fear. The fear of not being enough. Quantum tech, under Stewart's firm and ethical leadership, flourished. The new CEO, with the full support of the board and a revitalized Dr. Bennett as strategic consultant, redefined the company's mission. Lauren Miller's assistive technology project was not only resumed, but became the main flag of the new quantum tech, attracting investments from funds that valued social impact as much as dividends. The company was becoming what Albert and Ava's father had always dreamed of. Ryan met with Stewart once, at a modest cafe, away from the spotlights. It was the hardest conversation of his life. He asked for forgiveness, without excuses, without justifications. Stewart, with teary eyes, accepted. It wasn't a forgiveness that erased the scars, but one that allowed the wound to begin healing. He also called Helen, not to ask for a second chance, but to thank her. Thank her for caring when he himself no longer did. The conversation was brief, bittersweet, but it sealed a chapter of his life with peace instead of resentment. Now, sitting on a park bench, watching children play, he felt a calm no business acquisition had ever provided him. The remainder of his net worth was modest by his old standards, but still substantial for the rest of the world. The temptation to use that capital to restart, to prove he was still a business genius, was a constant whisper in his mind, but he knew that was the path back to the old prison. He picked up his cell phone. There was a name on his contact list he had been looking at for weeks, gathering the courage to call. Lauren Miller, the young engineer whose dream he had almost crushed. He didn't know what she would say. She had every right to hang up on him, but he had to try. He dialed the number. Her voice answered, professional and slightly surprised. "Hello? Lauren, this is Ryan Anderson." There was a silence on the other end of the line, heavy and full of history. He could feel her bracing herself, ready to reject him. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," he said quickly, before she could hang up. "And I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm calling to offer. I have remaining capital. It's not enough to build an empire, but it's enough to finance a dream. Your dream, fully, no interest, no equity, just an investment in the future you are building. Consider it a down payment on my debt to my father's promise." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a moment that felt like an eternity. Ryan held his breath, waiting for the rejection, the contempt, the cold, deserved refusal. He had prepared a speech, arguments about her project's potential, about how his capital could speed up development, but all of it sounded false and manipulative in the face of the simple honesty of his request. He wasn't proposing a deal, he was trying to do the right thing, perhaps for the first time in his professional life, without thinking about profit or return. He heard a deep breath on the other side, and then Lauren's voice, softer than he expected, replied, "Why? Why do this now?" "Ryan, because I finally understood what my father meant by legacy," he replied, his voice thick with sincerity. "It's not about the size of your net worth in dollars or the amount of stock you hold. It's about the positive impact you leave on the world. Your project, that is a legacy. Mine was just a cash flow. I want to invest in something real, something that lasts." There was another pause, but this time it was different. It was a silence of consideration, not hostility. I need to think. I need to talk to my team," Lauren finally said. "This is unexpected." "I understand," Ryan said. "There's no rush. The offer stands." He hung up the phone and did not feel like a man who had just offered a significant portion of his remaining assets. He felt light. For the first time in years, a financial decision did not cause him anxiety or greedy euphoria, but a sense of peace. A week later, he received an email. It was from Lauren. She and her team accepted the investment. Under one condition, he wouldn't be a silent investor. They wanted him to join the project as a voluntary advisor. "Your mind is still brilliant, Ryan," she wrote. "Your experience in overcoming obstacles is invaluable. We want your wisdom, not just your resources." The tears that came to Ryan's eyes were not from sadness or humiliation, but from overwhelming gratitude. It was a second chance he didn't think he deserved. Ryan's life transformed. He traded his penthouse in the financial district for a comfortable, unostentatious apartment. He spent his days not in war rooms, but in design workshops, discussing with engineers and occupational therapists how to improve the interface of software for seniors with motor difficulties. He used his genius mind not to exploit loopholes in the stock market, but to find ways to make technology more human, more accessible. On a sunny spring afternoon, a year after the day that changed his life, he was at the official launch of Lauren's startup product. The event was modest, held in a community center auditorium, but the room was full of future users, their families, and specialized social technology press. Ava and Stuart were in the front row. Ava, now a respected figure who divided her time between academia and the quantum tech board, gave him a warm nod. Stuart, with whiter hair but a serene smile, winked at him. As Lauren gave her passionate speech, thanking everyone who made the project possible, Ryan looked at the audience. He saw the faces of people whose lives would be a little easier, a little more connected because of what they had created. He was no longer the man in the center of the stage, the billionaire CEO receiving the applause. He was part of something bigger, and for the first time, he felt truly rich. The wealth he was building now could not be measured in euros or gold, but in dignity, in independence, in human connection. And he knew with a certainty that warmed his soul that this, finally, was a legacy his father would be proud of.